speakers for this day. Today is the World Environment Day, a very, very important and significant day uh, to be celebrated world over, especially in the context of the pandemic, in the context of the devastating environmental uh, crisis that we are facing across the different parts of the world. So World Environment Day reminds us of such important intrinsic ideas and points that we all need to somehow integrate those values and ideas of the environment and sustainable lifestyle in our daily lives. Unless and until we do that, we will all be doomed. So in that context, today we are organizing Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Samiti, this very, very prestigious peace and non-violence lecture. In fact, Gandhi Smriti is a national memorial of Mahatma Gandhi, the place where Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated. And we have this whole program, Peace and Non-Violence lecture series, where we invite eminent people from different parts of the world to give a lecture on some very, very relevant and important topic. So we have had Professor Sam Rinpoche, the internationally renowned Buddhist scholar. We have had eminent Ghanaian scholar Professor Parekh and many others who have been there with us in different places. So it's a very, very prestigious program for Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Samiti, this Peace and Non-Violence lecture series. And for today, it's two very significant things that are coinciding. This is the World Environment Day, and we are organizing this Peace and Non-Violence lecture as a tribute to the eminent environmentalist late Sundarlal Bahugunaji. He has been one of the pillars of the world famous Chipko movement, one of the greatest environment movement that we are seen in the world history in the terms of activism related to environment. And in that context, this whole lecture becomes significant. So we thought we should have some really eminent person to give a lecture today. And to give this peace and non-violence lecture, we have with us Professor Alberto Gomes. And the topic of his lecture is All Things Are Connected, Peace Ecology. In fact, as we talk here, to introduce Professor Alberto Gomes, actually Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Samiti is coming out with a series, a 3-volume series of a book of dialogues where we are going to interview eminent people from across the world on different subjects. So the first volume has already gone for printing, and in that we have had the privilege of interviewing Professor Alberto Gomes. And Professor Alberto Gomes, who is, to introduce him formally now, Professor Alberto Gomes is the founding director of the Dialogue, Empathic, Engagement and Peace Building Network. Actually, this deep network has eminent academicians, practitioners, people who are deeply interested and deeply connected to work on the issues of peace ecology, in the issues of anthropology of peace. The deep network has people all across the world, and it works towards a peaceful and ecologically regenerative world by bridging divides, promoting understanding, and transforming conflict, endorsing peace ecology as its paradise. In fact, in today's world, the whole discipline of peace ecology has become extremely critical, and so is the whole idea of anthropology of peace in the context of the global situation that we are in the context of the pandemic, in the context of the whole issue of environmental degradation. Also, peace ecology is a very critical aspect in the context of what we have read in the recent the World Human Development Report 2020, which talks about this the whole idea of the Anthropocene, where it talks about the human overpowering, overwhelming all other living species, nature, etc., etc., for those development goals. And in that context, Gandhi reminds us in a big way. So Professor Alberto Gomes, who is an emeritus professor at the La Trobe University in Australia, and also affiliated professor at the University of Jaume, Spain, which is one of the leading global universities. And in fact, we should thank Professor Gomes for facilitating a session of ours with that prestigious university, the University of Jaume, with our whole program on nonviolent communication. So thank you, sir, for that. In fact, after I did the interview with Professor Gomes, I shared with our director, Mr. Dipankar Shrigyan, where the Professor Gomes had talked at length on his extensive work on the anthropology of peace and peace ecology, especially with the indigenous communities in different parts of the world, that probably we in India could work to document interesting ideas of indigenous communities on their work on ecology and work on peaceful coexistence. To chair this session today, for every of our peace and non-violence lecture, as I said, we have very eminent person giving the lecture, and the chair has also been equally eminent person. So it gives a interesting insight to the whole lecture. So for that, we have Professor Anup Swaroopji. He has been with Gandhi Smriti. He has been an integral part of Gandhi Smriti for several decades. I think more than 20 years, 25 years, ever since he was with the Nehru Yuva Kendra Foundation. So he has a very, very intricate relationship with Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Samiti, and we are really honored to have him to chair this session. In fact, when I was talking to Professor Anup Swaroop sir, and I said that we have your friend who is going to give the peace and non-violence lecture, he said, "Oh, then it's absolutely, there is no way I will not come in for this program." So Professor Anup Swaroop is presently the chairperson of the Center for Global Non-Killing. He is also the founder of the Global Opportunities Commercialization Australia. Now he's based in Australia. Also, he has been the founder, Vice Chancellor of the Jagran Lake Cities University. He has a lot of work on the essence of global non-killing, and he has been associated with the late Glenn D. Page. So we are really honored to have him here. So now may I request our director, Mr. Dipankar Shrigyan, to give the welcome address to these two distinguished people who we are really honored to have them with us today. Our director, Mr. Dipankar Shrigyan.
Thank you, Dr. Vedavyas. It's really a pleasure and privilege for me to welcome Dr. Alberto Gomes, one of the renowned peace worker in the world. Sir, we are really obliged to you that you have given us time for this lecture, not only for this lecture, but you have also given us time for our dialogue book, as Dr. Vedvyas Kundu has elaborated it. The another person, Dr. Anup Swaroop, whom I know for last 5 and 6 years, but a champion of Gandhian principle in India, one of the pillar. And what I can say that under his guidance, his patronage, we have conducted so many programs on the Gandhian values and his constructive work. He has been always supportive to Gandhi's Priti and Darshan Samiti in its any initiative for the Gandhian purpose. As Dr. Kundu has told that this is a series, so we have a privilege of inviting the people who are known for their contribution to the society. And fortunately, this time we have also paying tribute to our one of the champions of environment, Padma Vibhushan, Dr. Sundarlal Bahugunaji. Then the question comes to everybody's mind how Bahugunaji and Gandhi is connected. Sometimes some of my friends told me that Gandhi sometimes told something about environment. That's why you are connecting Bahugunaji with Gandhi. No, sir, not at all. Gandhi was known for his empathy. And a people without empathy for the environment can't think about the conservation of environment, can't think about preservation of the heritage. And that's why Bahugunaji is very much important, and he's in the line of Mahatma Gandhi. And some of these andolans, as discussed by Dr. Kundu Chipko Andolan or the Tehri Band Bachao Andolan, was one of these works which prove that how much concerned he is about the environment. But the real contribution of Sundarlal Bahugunaji is his contribution for the Himalayan region. What we are looking today, what we are getting today is the imbalance, ecological imbalance. And that's leading towards the degradation of whole environment. And Bahugunaji was always fighting for that. He was not against any policy. He was not a activist of like that just to have a protest. He was an activist of something in mind that's have the empathy for the environment. I am sure that the Indian culture and civilization, which is very rich in preservation of our whole environment, as from the Sanatan period or the Vedic period, we have God in form of land, we have God in form of mountain, we have God in form of the rivers, and everything we consider as God. And starting from that point, even our whole civilization has always fought for the conservation of the environment. Starting from the Veda, either it is in the modern time, it was Birsa Munda or Buddha Bhagat, everybody talked about environment, Jar Jungle Jameen. Even when we go to US, you will find the letter of Red Chief of the Red Chief, and you will find how he was concerned about the environment. So it is the real time when this humanity must think about him in environment and its preservation. Otherwise, we are not too far away from our extinction. The whole humanity will perish unless we think about that. And you people, both of you, has worked a lot in this field, has real contribution towards the society. So I'm sure that by your lecture, the whole audience present here across the world, I am seeing some of my friends from other country also, they all will be benefited, and there must be some new ideas how to go ahead with this problem. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And I once again welcome both of you and everybody participating in the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. May I now hand over the proceeding to the chairperson of our chairperson for the day, Professor Swaroop, to give his introductory remarks. And over to Anup Swaroop, sir. Sir.
Very good morning to everyone, and thank you, Vedabhyaji. Am I visible? I'm not sure.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Can you see me?
No, sir, not at all.
Yeah, but I don't know because I'm putting my video on. Yet, okay, no. Yeah, I should be visible now. Okay, that's fine.
Yes,
So,
now it is
a
okay.
real privilege and honor. So, I should first of all thank Ankarji and also Vedabhyaji, because being a part of this, and especially with Alberto Gomes, my dear friend for many years now, I know that he is the right person to talk about peace ecology more than anything else. And that takes me back, of course, to Sundarlal Bahugunaji. And I recall way back, it was the winter of 2001. I met him in Ramakrishna Mission first time at Kolkata. And when I was talking to Sundarlal Bahugunaji and say homage to that great soul, he was talking about a lot of things. But one thing which really struck me was his humility in the true Gandhian traditions. And what he spoke was, and I was surprised, he said, don't give me any attribute for starting the Chipko. The credit really goes to the tribal women in Himachal Pradesh. And these tribal women, they started that movement to save the trees for a road widening project of the government. So I was so impressed, and the whole world thinks it is Chipko from Sundarlal Bhognaji, but he gave the real credit to the tribal women. And this might interest you, my friend Alberto, because a lot of things we have to learn from our own tribal roots, aborigines. And that also brings me to another point. And Sundarlal Bhognaji, not only generosity, his humility, his modesty, but he also became a legend for another reason. He was a one-man army, and he also showed to the world, like Gandhiji, that you can start a movement individually, and it can catch like wildfire. It can catch everybody's imagination. So that is something extraordinary about Sundarlal Bhognaji. So let me now come to my friend Alberto Gomes, and I should tell, maybe it was not in his introduction, but do you know that Alberto has Indian roots from Goa? And my friend, he is very much connected to India and Indian traditions. Like just now, Sri Gyanji was mentioning about Sanatan Dharma. So that again reminds me and takes me back to one of the beliefs of Sanatan civilization, and that is Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina. What actually means is, in Sanskrit, it is global well-being. Everything is connected, and everybody for everybody else. So that is something which is, really extraordinary. It came to the world much, much before. And I wrote a research paper while we were working on the Global Non-Killing Index. Now, this would surprise you that while I was writing, I found this whole concept in Gaia. You may be knowing the Gaia hypothesis of James Lovelock. Now, in Gaia, it's of course a Greek word, but it speaks of Mother Earth. And anybody who is attached to our ancient roots and ancient civilization, which I'm sure Alberto is, this is a belief and a thought which is rooted in India, in Mother Earth. And that is why we pray to Mother Earth. Now, when I'm talking about this, I should come straight away to the 2021 World Environment Day theme. And here I was surprised to find that the theme poem for the World Environment Day has been taken from another Indian. And again, if I quote those lines very quickly, I don't want to take or transgress on Alberto's time, but it says, united we stand, and we are all species of one earth. All cultures, all beliefs, earth is our home. All for one and one for all. These are the, in short, a few words from that theme poem, which is used by the United Nations Environment Program. Now, what has struck me most is I'm a ardent fan of science fiction, and you may have heard about Carl Sagan and that pale blue dot of Carl Sagan, where he speaks of Mother Earth. And when you talk of Earth, it is not a metaphor, but a finite reality. And that is the real truth. And unless we stand for each other, unless we stand for Mother Earth, we'll bring our own destruction. So, of course, this World Environment Day was started in June 1974. But I should mention that to encourage awareness, environmental consciousness, this is held every year, but also this means a decade of ecosystem restoration, which is again very critical to us. So June 5th marks another important milestone. I won't take much time, but I will request my friend Alberto Gomes to come ahead. I will request you after your talk, all questions, so that you're not disturbed. I know that you're going to give a PowerPoint. So let me again welcome you, Alberto, and all are connected. That is the topic. and that is so close to Indian ethos, our civilization. I know that you are the right choice, the best choice perhaps. Thank you so much. Alberto, over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my PowerPoint. So just give me a second, and then I'll start my presentation. My apologies. I'm just trying to work this. It will just give me a second. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Professor Anup Sharup, for this very kind and generous introduction. I would also like to thank Gandhi Symmetry Darshan Samata, especially Dipanka G, and my good friend, Dr. Vedabas Kundu, for giving me this honor, I should say, of presenting a talk on this very important day, not just World Environment Day itself, but also to pay tribute to a wonderful environmentalist, a person that who very sadly passed away 2 weeks ago. And he is, Sundala Bahagunaji, and in fact, someone who has inspired me in my early days as an environmentalist, as an environmental anthropologist. Now I'm sitting here in my home, which is in the suburb of Melbourne, which is named Bandura. Bandura is an Aboriginal word, Australian Aboriginal word, which means the plain where kangaroos live. There are still kangaroos in my area. In fact, sometimes in the morning you can see kangaroos hopping past my home, and but there are not as many of them here as probably before. Now, my home is located in the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to begin by acknowledging them as the traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Now, I have entitled my talk, All Things Are Connected, because this is a very common statement that ecologists make in relation to how nature, Mother Earth, or life in general operates or functions. But it is also an indigenous conception of the web of life. The Native Americans, Suquamish, Duwamish chief, Seattle, or in his famous speech, had declared that, and if I can, read him here, he said that how can you buy or sell the sky? the warmth of the land. The idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? This we know, the earth does not belong to man, man belongs to the earth. This we know, all things are connected like the blood which unites one family. All things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons of the earth. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. I would, of course, today change a bit of the wording, and I would say whatever we do to the web, we do it to ourselves. Now, these are words of wisdom, as one would, very clearly state. And indigenous peoples, over the years of my association, studying them as an anthropologist, I have learned a great deal. And in fact, I owe very much of my knowledge, my understanding of the world from the indigenous peoples that I've had the honor and privilege of living with and studying as an anthropologist. But when we look at also some of the famous people, I mean, today we are paying tribute to Sundarlal Bahuguna, who was also a faithful follower of Mahatma Gandhi. And Gandhi's statement, which is, I think, particularly connected to our topic of today, he states that what we are doing to the forest of the world is but a mirror reflection of what we are doing to ourselves and to one another. In other words, we are destroying ourselves, our fellow humans and other creatures when we destroy forests and nature, because all things are connected. The Chipko movement is what we, in a way, we are talking about quite a bit about the Chipko movement today in the connection that Sundarlal Bahuguna had as one of the leaders of the movement. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Chipko movement, the word Chipko means to hug in Hindi. And it inspired the environmentalist non-violent strategy of embracing trees to stop loggers from felling them. While Sundarlal Bahuguna was widely recognized as the leader of the movement, there were several women leaders like Gauri Devi, Surakash Devi, Sudasha Devi, Bachin Devi, and Vishuka Devi, and as well as Chandi Prasad Bhatt. So one could say, in fact, that this was indeed an eco-feminist movement. It was women who, in fact, ran up to the hills of the Himalayas, embraced those trees as you see in the photo here, and to ensure, or in fact, to protect the trees. But they knew very well, as we, as indigenous peoples right around the world know, is that it is not we who are protecting the trees, but it is the environment, nature, that protects us. And Sundarlal Bahuguna made a very important statement there that ecology is the permanent economy. Now, the Chipko movement, in fact, has inspired environmental movements right around the world. We have indigenous groups, in terms of the various, environmental movements to stop logging in their areas, to try to protect the forests as much as they can, whether it is in the South American, in the Brazilian, Amazonian forests, right across to Borneo. You have indigenous peoples who have been inspired by the movements that started in India in the 1970s. Now, when we look at some of the statements that indigenous peoples have made, about the world, about the environment, about nature, about our lives. For example, the statement that I found, particularly profound is by an elder of Ecuador from the Shuar tribe. And he said that you people dreamed of large buildings, of tall buildings, sorry, and as many cars as there are raindrops in the river. Now you begin to see that your dream is a nightmare. And Perkins asked the question, so how might we make things better? That's simple. He replied, all you have to do is change the dream. You need only to plant a different seed, teach your children to dream new dreams. And I think this is indeed really, profound. So what is the nightmare that we are facing in the world today? The current nightmare is, of course, the COVID pandemic, which has exposed the manifold problems afflicting humanity, from social inequality, racism, bigotry, alienation, violence, and ecological degradation. But the pandemic, while it has destroyed the lives and livelihood of so many of our fellow humans right around the world, and it has also given us a glimpse of what could be the beautiful states that we should foster in our world. Now, I use the word foster in the Old English meaning, that is to feed or to nourish. So here I want to suggest that we need to feed and nourish the goodness in human cultures. The light at the end of the pandemic tunnel is still faint. Many speak about striving for a new normal once we reach the other end of the tunnel. The Economic Forum focused on what is considered to be the Great Reset, and the reset here essentially is to get back to how it was in terms of the economic system that we lived by. Some talk about bounce back, building back better. I would argue that what we need is to reinstate humanity's normal. The new normal that we are speaking about is essentially going back to what it was previously. And here, the lessons of the indigenous peoples should bring through, and importantly, should in fact inspire us in the various sorts of changes that we want to bring about in this world that we live in. And what I want to say is what we have experienced in the past several decades and even the century is abnormality as far as human nature is concerned. And it is evident from my talk so far that I draw my inspiration from the wisdom of indigenous peoples. The persistent nightmare is ecological calamity, climate change. So what might the different seed or new dreams look like? And here I want to make a case for you to consider, which is a case for peace ecology. So if we look at the lessons that we can gain from indigenous peoples, many have recognized the importance of indigenous knowledge. More recently, the environmentalists, the famous environmentalist, I should say, David Suzuki, has said that the only people with a track record of having lived in balance with nature are the indigenous people. We have got to recognize that now. Their way of seeing the world is radically different from Western capitalist growth-driven system. It is rooted in a value system where we are utterly dependent on nature. As we emerge from this pandemic, we must be guided by the examples and teachings of indigenous peoples practicing reciprocal obligations of responsibility to do everything possible to ensure that nature can continue to thrive. So what might this new paradigm that I'm going to talk about, which is called peace ecology? It is one where we bring together ecology and peace studies, because for far too long we have had these two areas of studies, these two areas of practice treated almost that they are, separate, and they are, independent of each other. In fact, what peace ecology attempts to do is to bring them together, and in a way of what I've referred to as a cross-fertilization of ecology and peace studies. So in this notion, we have peaceability intersecting with living within the planet's ecological limits. And in peace ecology, peace and ecology, as I've mentioned, they are not seen as independent fields of study or independent areas of practice, but they're interwoven concerns. Peace, non-violence, social justice, protection of communities, ecological health, restoration of degraded environments, recognition of human rights and the rights of species and nature are considered to be interconnected, imbricated, and intersecting matters. What is attractive to me about peace ecology is that it reconciles this kind of the problematic disconnect between culture and nature. Because in the kind of Cartesian sense, that for far too long in the lives of human culture for the last 200 or 300 years, we have gone through this understanding that culture and nature are separate. And in fact, indigenous peoples have known this for a very long time, that you cannot separate culture from nature. Now, in peace ecology, it's by no means a uniform or homogeneous field, because there are so many different approaches in peace studies, and there are so many different approaches in ecology. And if we were to combine these two areas, it is not likely that we will get a kind of a uniform or homogeneous field. So peace ecology there are a variety of approaches in peace ecology. So when I say that this is a new paradigm, but it is by no means new in the sense of the philosophy, and when we consider the time-honored philosophy and practice of indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples have been practicing peace ecology for a very long time, and it's only quite recently that in the Western world that we seem to have discovered this new paradigm. Why I also find peace ecology to be attractive, very appealing to me, is because it offers a shift from the problematic and deeply flawed concepts and practice of sustainable development, SDGs. As many of you who know of my own work, I have been very critical of sustainable development, and especially the Sustainable Development Goals. And I do not have the time to go into details of that, but just as a very quick summary, SDGs tend to focus on doing less harm. The goals are focused on trying to keep business as usual, keep the status quo. It is oxymoronic because there is still the focus on economic growth, at the same time trying to achieve environmental sustainability, and these two concerns are contradictory. So that makes it an oxymoronic concept. It is anthropocentric because the focus tends to be on human goals and human welfare. It tends to be human-centered. It is colonialist because I've contended, argued that in the SDGs you have once again the Western domination where the experts and the various people that promote such forms of goals are the ones who are based in the center in the Western world, and they tend to once again continue this long tradition of colonialist domination of the rest of the world. It is hypocritical because it has allowed greenwashing by corporations. So corporate greenwashing continues under the guise of SDGs, and it is also hegemonic in the sense that it it gives us the idea that this is the only possible way, that there is no alternative. And we have, in fact, provided a lot of examples of how we can, in fact, speak about alternatives. Now, I'm going to run through very quickly the two aspects of peace. And once again, I want to stress the fact here that peace and ecology are, in fact, interrelated, interconnected, and they, in fact, are so, interlinked that one cannot actually separate the two. But for the sake of analysis and the sake of discussion, I have separated them just for you to get a better understanding of what the different ingredients. Now, in my talk, I keep stressing the fact that all things are connected. So when we look at peace, we have all these different ingredients. Through the work, the marvelous work, I should say, of anthropologists of peaceful societies, in a web page that is dedicated to a description and outline of many peaceful societies right around the world, anthropologists have maintained very detailed accounts of these societies that they have had the privilege of study. There are many books written by anthropologists about peaceful societies, and through that large corpus of work, what I have done is I have come up with a kind of a map, if I can put it as a diagram, to present to you all the different ingredients. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to go into the details of each of them, but very quickly, the different ingredients which all come together to to constitute what one would consider to be a peaceful societies. The first is egalitarian. In all these peaceful societies, we find that they would try as much as possible to keep things, to keep equity, to make sure that equity is evident. They also make it very clear that they want to try to develop an egalitarian society which is focuses on equality. There is a great deal of altruism and reciprocity, and this is something that is marvelous among indigenous peoples, how they share almost everything that they get hold of. In fact, when I was living with the Malaysian Aboriginal people, I find that each day would go with people giving something to someone else. And as an anthropologist, I felt that I wanted to, in fact, keep track of all the kinds of, acts of kindness and all the various sorts of goods and, things, stuff that was being shared. And I wanted to come up with a kind of a network of, and I found that after, several months of doing this, what I had was, large charts of arrows going in all different directions. A day would go where someone will give, let's say the person has purchased fish from the shops, will give all the fish away to each one within the household. And on that very day, you get another household going down to the shops and buying fish, and they give out, the fish as well. Now, I kept asking the question, why don't you just keep the fish for yourself? Because at the end of the day, everyone will end up with the same number of fish. And it was not the fish that mattered, but it was the act of sharing. It was the act of giving and generosity. And those were, that's a very important attribute, a social attribute in such peaceful societies. There is very strong spirit of cooperation. Peaceability in the sense that children are socialized into developing the ability to live in peace with one another. Whenever there is conflict, and conflict is something that's quite natural, people do not just see eye to eye on everything that happens in the world or in through the interactions. And there are marvelous ways of trying to transform such conflict before it escalates into violence. They are very strongly non-violent. Children are taught from a very young age to be non-violent. There's mutual respect for one another within the community. They respect differences, and they also ensure that everyone in that society is included. But the most important aspect of a peaceful society is empathy. As humans, as neuroscientists have provided convincing evidence, as humans, we are hardwired for empathy. We have an innate capacity to empathize. The mirror neurons in our brains, in fact, ensures that we have empathy for one another. But such empathy tends to be blocked by economic system that we live in, with the kind of focus of heightened individualism and individuation, which tends to prevent us from empathizing, and we end up dehumanizing the other. Now, there are numerous books written about how humans are innately good. And the most recent publication that I've come across, and as soon as I picked up the book, and I just found it difficult to put it down, and read it very quickly. And in this book by Nicholas Christakis, entitled Blueprints, which was published in 2019, he challenges the nebulous assertion that humans have an innate capacity for aggression, cruelty, prejudice, and self-interest. In fact, he points out very convincingly, it's a compelling book that states that humans are hardwired via natural selection to create good and humane society. And this is epitomized, the kinds of attributes that that Christakis has, in fact, through a number of different examples that he gives in his, in his own sort of research, was that such societies have a kind of what he refers to, possess this thing that he refers to, which is what, very much something that we develop innately through being members of society. And this is what he referred to as a social suite, which is comprised of a capacity for love, friendship, cooperation, and learning. And in fact, Christakis, in fact, says that, even though we live in a world where, in terms of human history, which has, replete with, seemingly, I should say, replete with violence, because there's always a disproportionate attention given to violence and war in our societies. He argues that we cannot escape our social blueprint for goodness. There is more that unites us than divides us, and society is basically good. Now, Christakis has written, a book that's almost around 500 pages about the goodness in society. But indigenous peoples have, as I mentioned, as I keep repeating myself here, have known this all this while. And among the indigenous peoples of South America, they have this concept of buen vivir, in Spanish for good living. And here in buen vivir, what we find is that nature and human goodness, living in society of peace and harmony, they all come together in this concept of buen vivir. And there are, of course, a number of different traditional concepts from different parts of South America or Latin America. And buen vivir is the Spanish translation for sorry. let me try again. Suma Kawase, which is a Quechua term in South America. Now the ecology bit, and so we take the peaceful culture that I just described earlier on, and we combine this with the other aspects of what I consider to be the important ingredients of peace ecology. And among the various indigenous groups that anthropologists have studied, and even in my own research among the Malaysian Aboriginal people, I've found these different ingredients. One is regenerative. They, in fact, do not practice what is called sustainable development or sustainability, because what they believe is that we cannot maintain things as they are, or we cannot strengthen the current system. And regenerative is an ecocentric perspective where nature itself, through after damage and after kind of disruption, it regenerates. The focus is on ecocentric rather than being anthropocentric. Humans are part of nature, and not that, not like the way we think about ourselves as being separate from nature. There is another concept, and I don't have the time, and I wish I did, to go into details about this, is concentric ecology. Many indigenous peoples do not see themselves as separate from the animals or that they share the planet with. In fact, some indigenous communities say that they are kin, they are related. They're kind of like a sort of a family relationship with the various animals. And so you find that among some of the Native Americans, they see themselves as related to the salmon. There is also a connection with ecological ontology here, where they define themselves on the basis of their environment. So the indigenous peoples that I researched among the, in Malaysia, among the forest peoples, they define themselves as being, people from the forest. Now, their ecology is not something that's separate from the religions. In fact, the spiritual connection of their environment and ecology and the gods and the deities, they're all, interconnected and interrelated. So, Bickrest, for example, has referred to it as sacred ecology, this kind of connection. The other wonderful thing about peace ecology among indigenous peoples is biomimicry. And they try not to, in many ways, they mimic the natural processes. Their farming systems are, in fact, one where they have observed long-standing observation of what happens in the environment, in the natural processes, and then they mimic and imitate nature in terms of their various economic practices. And most importantly, they have respect for nature. And so this is, I will be happy to elaborate on some of this when we have the question and answer the Q&A. Now, very quickly, when I look at my own research among the Malaysian Aboriginal people, and I have written quite extensively about what I call the semi-peace ecology, we find that there is an egalitarian ethos. They practice what has been referred to as deliberative democracy, and when we speak about deliberative democracy, we think of various Western political scientists or Western political philosophers like Habermas, but this is deliberative democracy as practiced in Orang Asli Malaysian Aboriginal village, which is socially inclusive. It is the decision making is done consensually, and while they still maintain a sense of individual autonomy, but they always put the welfare of the community ahead of individual, demands. They practice what is called solidarity economics, focus on redistribution, sharing, generalized reciprocity to ensure that the reciprocity is not just balanced between 2 or 3 individuals, but it is generalized in the sense that the whole community is involved or implicated or connected to that kind of exchange that takes place. Everyone has equal access. It is to the resources in the area, and they believe in what is referred to as communal and ecocentric ownership. They don't say that they own the land. In fact, land or the various resources or the various sorts of products that you find in the forest, people like the Malaysian Aborigines would say that they are owned by the spirits, or they're owned by, and the spirits are actually very much, they are the kinds of the personification of the various of nature itself. For them, the spirits is something that's real. They have direct relations with it. And the solidarity economics is also one that focuses on collaborative. The forest is full of life, energy, and creative. It is the relationship is material, spiritual, and cosmological, and it's also a source of the identity, as I mentioned, among Malaysian Aborigines. For Malaysian Aborigines, the relationship with the forest is metaphorized as an adult child carrying, where the forest is the parent and the humans as its child. So when you have such a kind of philosophy, such a kind of belief, conception, then deforestation amounts to parricide or parenticide. That means you're killing your parents. So finally, I want to turn to the work of the late Kenyan activist, a Nobel laureate. And her most profound words, and I want to end there, she says that in the course of history, there comes a time, sorry, I should say Mangari Mata. In the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called to shift to a new level of consciousness, to reach a higher moral ground, a time where we have to shed our fear and give hope to each other. The time is now. Happy World Environment Day. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks to you, Alberto. Professor Alberto, you made a absolutely outstanding presentation. And on behalf of all those present, I can see that there are 77 of us who are very ardently listening to you. So let me compliment you. Also,
thank you very much.
Yeah, also let me come straight away. It is an observation, not really a question. That is about this book, Blueprint, 2019, published in 2019. And I was, going through it. Of course, I could only read a review, not the entire book. But I could see that it is talking, you're right, ecocentric world order, not anthropocentric. What we as humans have done over the years, that we have become too greedy. And that is echoed by Mahatma Gandhi himself when he says there is enough for everybody's need, but not enough for greed. And because I have studied science a lot, and I recently published a paper and I was talking about quantum physics and also the science of spirituality. When it comes to our own Indian traditions, the Sanatan traditions in terms of the Vedas. And I would say that the Higgs bosons or the God particles, now what they've shown is, and what was already believed centuries ago, that the whole world is interconnected. We are not different. If now in this pandemic, in COVID-19, what we have found is that a little disturbance in one part of the globe, or if we hurt one animal, maybe the bat, we as humans cannot stay away from a disaster that now beckons us. So I am not going to take much time, but I would only say that your proposition that all things are connected has got deep roots in our own civilizational ethos. And as you rightly said, I will just talk about Margaret Mead, the very famous anthropologist. You must be knowing, of course, about her. And she says that the real human advancement was not the discovery of the or the invention of the wheel or fire. It was the moment she found fossils where the femur, which is the thigh bone, has healed or repaired. That showed empathy amongst the ancient humans. And that empathy led her to believe that this is the time when humans were not animals because they were empathetic to other humans. So I'll just make this passing reference, and I will just say this much, that in science also there is a support to your overall hypothesis that all things are interconnected. So now I can open it to questions from a very august gathering. Yes. So can I leave it to the open house?
Yeah, sir. Either they can ask questions directly, or anyone can write in the chat box so that we can find out what are the questions.
So Alberto, you can see the chat box, I'm sure. So you can have a look at that.
Also, anyone interested in asking a direct question are also yes.
Yeah.
So, sir, one of my question, sir,
Okay.
For Professor Alberto Gomes, we are talking about the ethnocentric, the need to move towards the ethnocentric approach to human development, right, away from the anthropocentric approach to human development. But probably, you see, it's much easier to talk in talks like this. And as Anup Swarup sir has been a bureaucrat himself, and many of it is much easier to talk in different forums, but much challenging to actually implement in the context of policies and programs and ideas and schemes. So what are the challenges on trying to implement a ethnocentric envirocentric approach to the development goal? The second is also, when we are linking with policies and schemes, I am also would like to ask in the context of the whole idea of environmental jurisprudence. So how laws and rules which are actually swayed by the capitalist tendencies for over growth, which is beyond any kind of we may bring in laws which can actually get away with the environmental point of views and all, just in the name of development. So these are some of the challenges. So how challenging it is to promote ethnocentrism in the context of policies and schemes, and in the overall context of the environmental jurisprudence. So in fact, I would request even not only Professor Gomes sir, but also Anup Swarup sir, having been a former bureaucrat, to share their vision on this, idea on this.
Okay, thank you, Vedabhyaji. First, after all, I would request Professor Alberto Gomes. Yes, sir, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Vedabas, for your question. I think you may have misheard what I said. I did not use the word ethnocentrism, rather ecocentrism. So I think the issue here is that the problem that we have in the world today is because of ethnocentrism. I think the fact that it's okay.
Actually, I meant ecocentrism.
Yeah,
by mistake,
okay, that's fine. So ecocentrism, and many of the problems that we have in the world today is because of anthropocentrism. The fact that we think that humans are superior, dominant upon everything, everything else, all the other creatures. And in fact, I've written, as you probably know, I've written quite a bit about, um, how certain aspects of nature are of, pivotal importance to us, not as resources, but they're important to us precisely because they define who we are as part of being part of nature. And indigenous peoples have known this all this while. Now, the other thing I feel there is always a danger here is that, and that we tend to fall into the trap of various kinds of concepts and various sorts of philosophies that we have created as humans. So, for example, we take the view of development, and development is a concept a concept that we have constructed, we have created it. And the issue about all these kinds of various constructs that we have come up with is that we try to squeeze, we try to kind of, impose, well, squeeze is a better word, I think, squeeze all these various sorts of, ecological principles into the constructs that we have created. And I think this is really, problematic. So uh, I always have very deep reservations about any concept to do with development. And some have argued that I tend to be anti-modern. Well, possibly, but I think that if we actually look at some of the problems we have in the world, it has a very close connection to our idea of what constitutes modernity. And I feel that um, if humanity, I'm detracting from a question here, but I think that sometimes, we have various people that make contentions like, I want to go and save the world. I want to save the planet. And this, in fact, if you really scratch the surface of what that statement, the statement that the person makes, is that it actually speaks of the arrogance that humans have, that I want to go and save the planet. And let's be honest, the planet will go on, but humans won't. So if anything that you want to be focused on is that we have to focus, we have to concentrate on how we are going to save humanity, not the planet. And the point here I want to make here is that sometimes we make sort of arguments that I want to protect the environment. And this idea of protection is, in fact, the same sort of idea that colonialists have presented when they went to different parts of the world and said that we want to protect the people. Uh, and that's why we're going to take over the culture, because this idea of protection. Yeah, what I want to say is that we have to look at ways of how we can live within the planetary limits, ecological limits, but we also have to repair the ecological rift, because what has happened is that humans have detached themselves from the natural environment. There is a very clear rift in terms of how we lead our lives. We have been alienated from nature to the extent that nature now is only viewed through the prism or the lens of our own economic concepts. And I think this is where the real problem is. And why I find indigenous cultures and traditional cultures appealing is precisely because they look at it from the prism of ecology. For far too long, we have had a clash between the two egos, ecology and economy. And always we tend to put economy ahead of ecology. We put, uh, we put economic wealth ahead of planetary health. And I think this has to change. And that's why indigenous peoples have voiced their desperation with so-called the modern world, because we tend to put economy. Even when it comes to the COVID pandemic at the moment, now we find that governments tend to focus much put much greater focus on economic wealth, the economic concerns, rather than human concerns, or I would also say, people's health. And I think, yeah, sorry, I'm sort of rambling on, but the point I'm trying to make is that.
Thank you, Alberto. You said it all, but I'll just add a quick dimension because Dr. Vedabhya just mentioned he wanted my views also. And I was a part, since you made a mention about the Sustainable Development Goals, and you said that you do not agree. In fact, at the UNDP, while I was working with the United Nations, at the end of 2015, we were contemplating, there was a discourse on the Sustainable Development Goals, that is until 2030. Now the question was, why don't we just put an end to all this, the talk about development? So the view by most of the countries, and that was the consensus, especially from the developing world, that we do not have an opportunity to develop. Our people are living in abject poverty, unlike the developed world. And here I will just make a quick comment. You were speaking about the Cartesian model of the West, which is not really accepted in our societies, including the tribals and the aborigines. And that has brought a lot of damage to this world of ours. And I would also make a quick mention that Earth cannot sustain. Maybe Earth will survive, yes, but it will not be habitable at all. Not only for humans, but for all species. And the amount of tremendous loss of biodiversity which is happening on a daily basis. And that brings me to a little historical past. Maybe in the 1960s, I'm sure that some of our participants today must have heard about the Club of Rome report. And that report was like a fire. It spoke about a very important concept, and that was, it was actually an economics concept, limits to growth. You cannot keep on growing forever, because what has happened, the developed world has really achieved a level of, I would say, prosperity, which nobody really thought. But in the developing world, the haves and the have-nots. So the question of have-nots is, and that was discussed again at the United Nations, and the thing which came up was that after 15 years, that is in 2030, let us take a stock, and maybe we can come up with another nomenclature, not the Millennium Development Goals, not the Sustainable Development Goals, but a new nomenclature, where we would be talking only about development. And at this point, let me also make a quick reference to the Center for Global Non-Killing. And Glendy Page, the founder, and he did tremendous amount of research both at University of Hawaii and at Princeton. And what he found, that only 0.05% of humans are actually killed. So you're absolutely right on this, that empathy is what binds us together as a human race. We do not kill, but it's only in recent times, maybe in the last century, that unstinted growth, economic considerations, and above all, political and individual egos. These egos have made us a human, which is even worse than an animal. When you talk of Nagasaki or Hiroshima, you talk of numerous wars which go on, both individually and by the countries. So I won't take much time, otherwise, this would be a sort of a lecture. So thank you so much, Alberto, for your response. Again, I would now leave it to the open house. Any questions, sir? Anybody from the audience?
There is one question here in the chat, and it is a question to me, and it was, what are the key lessons of the COVID pandemic that we can use to educate Homo sapiens on the imperative of all things are connected? Now, that's a question by Jayana. Okay, the thing, I gave a paper. Sorry, I made a presentation some last year. In fact, two presentations on the COVID pandemic, and they were. One was entitled "Neoliberalism: Public Policy in COVID-19," And one of the things is that, which is in fact related to what you just said, Anup, about the Sustainable Development Goals. There are so many, ways. That's why I use the word hegemonic, discourse, because the thing about hegemony here and the way ideas work is that even when you feel that there are problems with the words or the concepts that are being introduced to you, you still continue to use them. And this is an indication of how dominant the set of ideas have become. So, for example, we still use the word development. I've stopped using the word development now because embedded in that concept of development is destruction. And in fact, it has gone right around the world and destroyed so many different groups of people. And today, when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, it's really problematic precisely because of the various agendas, and some of the agendas are so cleverly concealed that it continues with let me put it this way, okay? If some of the largest environmental criminals in the world, even like Monsanto, okay, who we know has had so, I mean, I could be sued by the company now, but the point is that with all the various kinds of ecological destruction and damage that they cause in this world of ours, if a company like that was to embrace the SDGs, in fact, Monsanto was one of the first few companies, together with Coca-Cola. These are the two companies that have embraced SDGs. So if there are corporations of this sort that are in fact promoting and advocating the SDGs, then there must be something terribly wrong, isn't there? So this is where I believe that we have to really go back to go back and the other thing too is Anup, the issue here is that I'm like a voice in the wilderness. Every time I talk about a critique of Sustainable Development Goals and the problems with it, and trying to use the critical framework that I have, and what happens is that every time I do this, someone in the audience will turn to me and think that I'm crazy, that I'm insane. And the reason for this is because it's not just a hegemonic discourse of making something acceptable and that there are no alternatives to it, but also there is a lot of money that's involved. Because you will have corporations that are providing, they will not, for example, support a person who is going to be very critical of the SDGs, because the SDGs is essentially promoted by big universities, they're promoted by corporations, there is a lot of money to be gained, there's a lot of money to be made, and this is where I would say the key problem with it. But having said that, the world doesn't go around money, and indigenous peoples have shown that there is something that is even much stronger than this, and that's ecology, and that's the natural world that we live in. And if you think that you can go ahead with the way we live today, and let's forget it. And I think in the next, with the climate, with the problems with climate at the moment, the erratic weather patterns, the rising sea levels, all these are real. They are going to, it's pointless. I should probably say it's pointless for us to sit here and talk about all these things, because in the next 20, 30 years, we are not going to exist in the way we are in our lives, and not just in many parts of the world. And the sad thing about this, it is the vulnerable people, the people who live in along the coastal areas, the various indigenous communities in small Pacific islands. They are the ones who are going to face this wrath of nature, to what we have done to the planet. They're going to suffer from it first. Now, to the question from Jayanath, sorry, I keep talking about this, but from Jayanath, someone once commented saying that, often politicians will make this statement that we are all in it together when it comes to the COVID pandemic. And the issue here is not, we are not, definitely not. I can't remember who it was who pointed out that we are all in the same storm. But the issue here is that some are traveling in their luxurious yacht, while many are in their small dinghies. And the thing about this is that what it has done, the COVID pandemic, as I pointed out, is that a virus that is invisible to the naked eye has in fact exposed the various problems of humanity to the extent that today we can see the inequality, the people that are being rewarded and awarded, I would say, are the ones who don't deserve it. The frontliners, frontline people, the health workers, who are the ones that should be rewarded for all the work that they've done, are not being, so the inequality is stark, and the inequality has been exposed in terms of this issue. So all things are connected. I think we have to go back, Janat, we have to go back to looking at what it is that matters to us most. And when I talk to my indigenous friends, what does matter to them most is the various things that Christakis has identified in his book on the goodness of society. What matters most for indigenous peoples is the capacity to love, is the capacity to be generous to one another, is the capacity to have friendships, is the capacity for family, and the capacity to cooperate. And these are the kinds of things that are fundamental to our human nature. Okay, and if I can just make one more point. When you talked about Margaret Mead and the fact that there are, in fact, unfortunately, Margaret Mead did not make that statement. So it was one of those where someone must have cooked up this statement and linked it with Mead about what was the starting point of civilization. But the important thing here is that about humanity is that when we look at Homo sapiens, the only reason that Homo sapiens, 200,000 years ago, that Homo sapiens were able to exist was because they were sociable and they formed corporate groups. And in Africa, when they emerged, just imagine that you are whatever, a kind of a hominin that emerges in an area which is populated by ferocious animals. Okay, and if you are an individual, there's absolutely no way. And if you think of yourself as a solitary animal or creature, as a Homo sapien at that time, there's absolutely no way you would have survived in the sort of plains in Africa. And the only way that Homo sapiens were able to survive and thrive was largely because they cooperated. They got together, they formed groups, and they created what we call, social systems. And this, I think, is a fundamental aspect about humanity that we seem to have lost. We focus on duality.
Yeah, Alberto, thank you for your comments here. I entirely agree, because humans became gregarious in terms of evolutionary biology. It was basically conscious cognition and cooperation that made us what we are. Otherwise, we were animals, after all. That is what my strict evolutionary biology view is. But as you rightly mentioned, we are at a takeoff stage to go to another level. And that level is possible only if we become much more conscious. And that is where we need spirituality. The Eastern spirituality is not much known to the Western world. That is my view. But I won't take much time again. I know that amongst us, Alberto is a very, I would say, senior Gandhian, a veteran. and he is Dr. Y.P. Anand. And I could see that he was also listening to us. I'm sure that he would be wanting to ask you, or maybe make an observation. Dr. Y.P. Anand, I hope you are still there. I cannot see everybody now on my screen. I don't know the reason. So, okay.
Can I just interrupt? I can see a good friend of mine, Professor Makiri Stewart Haravera, who is an expert, the person who has actually inspired me a great deal, and she is a Maori and a professor of anthropology at University of Alberta. Makiri? Sorry to put you on the spot.
You did rather.
I think you're muted.
There is no audio. Actually, there is no audio.
Yeah. All right. Am I unmuted?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was just saying, yes, it did rather take me by surprise, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning here. And Alberto is, of course, far, 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 far too generous and kind. Let me say that. And I'm an expert in nothing at all. I had many thoughts as I was listening to Alberto, whom I just love his work so much, and let me see. One of the things that I thought when the discussion was about relationship to other species, and a discussion that I've had quite a few times in various places lately, is that relationship, because, and somebody raised the question of the role of law here earlier in the discussion. And of course, you'll know that there is quite a body of work being done around the idea of the rights of nature and, in international law. And they talk about non-human species. And I always, that's a perfectly fine appellation, of course. But yet, when I think about, for us as Maori, and to go back to what Alberto was saying about that relationship of kincentricness, or to being kincentric, yes, of course, for Maori, we are the younger of the species. We are the ones who are in service to all of those with whom we are absolutely deeply genealogically connected. So there is no question in our minds about that relationship, that kinship, because all the way back to the very beginning of time, our experts, of which I have no expertise whatsoever, can recite those genealogies. And what those genealogies tell us is that we have responsibility to those species. And so my preference is I think about, the rights of nature and non-human species, is I do prefer the term more than human species, because they are more than us. We are in such a much lower position, quite opposite to the Descartesian and, Adamic view of humankind being in some position of superiority. If only, however, we can aspire. But, and so I think that that's a very important point that I was thinking about as I listened to dear Alberto. But no buts. I could not agree more. I did smile to myself over the development goals. I was asked to give a talk at my university, and I did very much what Alberto has just done. I went through them all and provided a strong critique of them, almost word for word, as Alberto just did. And that was not well received. It was not well received. And probably everybody did think I was completely mad. certainly they were displeased. I don't know that I have anything that I can really add right now, except I am intensely grateful to be here listening to this discussion. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. That's, yeah.
Thank you so much. I think your observations are very valid. And so now open to others. I can see quite a few participants. No questions, especially from our youngsters, from the youth.
Anup, there is a question from
Yes.
there is a question on the chat, and the question is, why can't peace ecology be extensively promoted through religious organizations?
Good point. Yeah. You would like to take it on? Yes, please.
Okay, I'll try.
Okay.
I think one of the problems we have here is that many, I wouldn't say all, religious organizations tend to be anthropocentric. And even the deities in many of these religions tend to focus on, usually male, gods and deities. And I think, I know I can be very controversial and provocative by saying that. But when we compare that with indigenous peoples, many of their spirits, and they tend to be, for example, the Malaysian Aboriginal people, that many of their spirits are not human spirits. In fact, many of these spirits are deities that are connected to nature, and so there is a major difference here. How can we promote peace ecology? Of course, we can promote peace ecology, but through religious organizations. However, I don't think religious organizations, if they are focused on different kinds of ideas to do with the relationship between humans, the cosmos, and the environment, it will become quite difficult, I would think, and problematic. So
yeah. Okay.
My answer here is that we probably have to promote peace ecology through these various sorts of forums that we have, and taking on a much stronger activist role. And my as my dear friend Makiri knows, that when you give a talk which is critical of sustainable development, people might think that you are insane, but also you will know that you will not get invited again to speak.
I don't think this is not an audience. They value your talk so much. I can see that they're all glued to the your PowerPoint. Wonderful PowerPoint. I'll just make a quick observation here. In the Sanatan tradition, even most of them, many of them are actually not most. I would say many of them are women, and who are worshipped, and not only women but also in I would say inanimate objects, or even something like, say, earth, air, fire, water, even sun, they are worshipped. So not in all religions, and especially in dharmic traditions, dharmic religions, they also value and worship women as well as inanimate objects. So maybe in the Western world this is not well known. So this is one point which I thought I'll just make it clear. So I entirely agree otherwise. So let us take other questions, please. Anybody?
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Okay, please.
Sir, I am Ranjit Sarkar from Kerala.
Sir, can you please introduce yourself also before the question?
Sir, I am Sarkar, Ranjit Sarkar from Kerala, India.
Okay, wonderful. Right, sir.
Sir, my question I want to ask both of you, to Professor Alberto Gomes as well as Professor Anup Sarup. I want your advice to give the youths now we cannot open our mouth because of threatening, as well as the political problems. A lot of problems is there in India, especially in Kerala. So what advice you can give for the youth and the coming youth, youngsters for the world peace? That's my small question, sir. Please. I want to know the answer from
Alberto,
both.
you would like? Yeah, Alberto. Okay. After Alberto, please, Alberto, you can.
No, yeah, please, you go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead because I worked with the youth in NYKS and also with Gandhi Smriti almost 25 years back. And even now I'm intimately associated with them. I patronize a couple of organizations in India, particularly with the youth. And Ranjit, you made a very good point. And let me come straight away to Sundarlal Bahugunaji. And he showed why he was, extraordinary. To my mind, because he showed to the world, not only to India, that one man can make a difference. He can become he's a legend. He was not only an ardent Gandhian, but also he became a legend because he made the government rethink about development in the Himachal Pradesh, and that made a lot of difference. So one man can really make he was a one man army. So I entirely agree. When you talk about Kerala, it can be Kerala or any other state in the country, maybe the Northeast. The point is, when the masses are with you and when you're true to your beliefs, you can always stand up. One thing which has always impressed me in Kerala whenever I went to the youth development centers or to the youth clubs, which were youth clubs or the Mahila Mandals, entirely by young women, and youth clubs by both women and men. One thing which impressed me a lot was that against the wall of that youth club, they had all the developmental schemes, and the development was really, I would say that it was close to nature. In fact, I was surprised to find in one occasion on the roads there are a lot of potholes. So they started a tree plantation ceremony in those potholes in Kerala. And this is an example which I could cite everywhere, wherever I went. I said, you can make a difference. And they started a community drive to plant trees in those potholes on the roads because there were a huge number of accidents. So there can be a very unique, creative idea, and that idea can bring about all the change. To my mind, that will make a difference. And Kerala can really show, I would say, it can show the way to the rest of the country and to the world. Ranjit, I hope that I answered you in short. Thank you.
Thank you,
I think
sir.
possibly,
Can you,
yeah, possibly do
run?
not have
Yeah, can you
more
hear me? Because I think there's some issue with the
Yes,
audio.
yes, sir. I can hear you. I can hear you, sir.
Yeah, you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay.
No, I would answer this question a bit differently because when I observe what's happening in the world today, it's so disappointing to see the responses from the older people. You know, people of my generation, for example, when it comes to climate change, they are more interested in the economic, implications of whatever action that they take to deal with issues like climate change. But it is the young people, the people like the Greta Thunbergs of the world, the young, young school kids who, in fact, are demonstrating, protesting in this country in my country, in Australia, for example, at the moment, we have a government that is, it's not just so disappointing, it is an embarrassment as far as the world, stage is concerned, because they are still supporting fossil fuel. We have got a prime minister that in parliament held on to a piece of coal. And here is someone who, in fact, are denying, not just, we have a number of denialists within the ranks of the government in Australia, but it is a government that is still holding on to, fossil fuel. And in fact, post-COVID, one of the things that they wanted to focus attention on is what was referred to as the gas-led development post-COVID, pandemic, and focus on gas. So can you imagine that we have people of the older generation, my generation, who are leading the world today that are in fact going to cause much greater damage. So it's the young. And if we want to think about educating the youth, I think the ones that needs to be educated or re-educated, I should say, will be the older generation, because they're just holding on to a lifestyle that is ecologically insane. And so I think the young, in fact, because it is their future that they are worried about. It is their and the future of of their children. And this is where I think it is important that we sort of we put our we have to put notice to our leaders of these countries and point out to them that this is by no means a way to go in to develop various ways of dealing with the kinds of problems that we have in the world today as far as ecological issues are concerned. So I'm sorry, you probably may have wanted me to say something about how we can work out ways of how we can educate the youth. And I believe very strongly that I mean your state in India, from what I know, is a lot more progressive as far as issues to do with not just environmental issues, but also issues to do with gender. And in terms of we still find that the problem, even when we look at the Chipko movement, for example, there seems to have been so much focus on the males who were involved in the Chipko movement. And I was so pleased to hear that the late Bahaguna, in fact, did point out that there were women leaders, and they are the ones who, in fact, in many ways, took on the challenge against, not just against the logging companies, the environmental criminals, but they also put on the map the real importance or the real importance of women's rights, and a challenge not just of environmental destruction or the destruction of forests, but also a challenge to a challenge to patriarchy. And I think this is really an important thing to keep in mind, that
Alberto, just one point I can, just one point, and that is Kerala is known for matriarchy, not for patriarchy. And many tribal societies in India, there is a separate chapter on tribal laws in our constitution for the last 70 years. And I would say it is their vision that they did not ever interfere with the tribal social ethos, their life as such. And I've been working with the tribals in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, with the Unges, with in Car Nicobar, Sentinelese. And what I could find is that the women led, not the men. So actually, as you rightly mentioned in the beginning, the empathy comes from women-led development, and that is true. So at this juncture, should we should take on other questions as well? I don't want to leave out anything.
Okay. Sir, thank you both. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
In fact, sir, as you have rightly pointed out, we must look at culture from a cultural feminist approaches and the critical race theory approaches, so that we have a more all-encompassing view possibly. And also when we are talking of non-violence and feminism,
Dr. Vedavyas, you're not audible.
oh, sorry, I had muted.
Yeah.
I was saying, as you rightly pointed out, sir, we must look at culture from a cultural feminist approach and critical race approach.
Absolutely. So
we don't have any questions further. So
okay.
in that case, we can
So I'll
close.
hand it back to you. Maybe you can. How would you like to conclude, or should I thank my friend?
No, I will request our research officer, Madam Geeta Shukla ji, to formally give the vote of thanks.
Okay.
So
Yes,
This is Anshu.
Anshul. Yes, please, please, please. Yes, please. Madam
Yes,
Anshulji. Yes,
I
please.
wanted to ask.
Hello. Hello. Yes, please. Anshulji, please ask.
I am being muted times and again.
No, no, no. You please continue. I think there is a
Thank you.
technical issue sometimes. Yeah, please.
Okay,
Please ask.
thank you so much, sir. First of all, greeting.
Madam, you are muted again. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. So my question is, how can we employ dialogue to establish peace in its real sense? Secondly, we are hearing the term ecofeminism very loudly these days. So the concept of ecofeminism, how far will it be instrumental in establishing peace, be it environmental peace or the otherwise peace understood in a broader manner, not in a very limited context? That's what my question is. Thank you so much.
Okay, Alberto, you take on this question. I'm sure this is at the very heart of your presentation.
Okay, I thank you very much for the question. It's Anshul, right? Did I get your name right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. My apologies. Well, I was the director of the Center for Dialogue at La Trobe University, and I think the whole idea and the concept of dialogue is marvelous. It's very good to kind of bring people together. But one of the problems I found about dialogue, when I was running the center at La Trobe University, was that we tend to bring people who are prepared and willing to dialogue, but the ones that we actually want to to get them to share different points of view are the ones who are not interested in sitting down and dialoguing. So in the deep network that we set up, one of the things that we focus our attention on is to broaden this concept of dialogue. And dialogue does not necessarily mean talking and listening, compassionately to one another. But here, dialogue is to bring people together in order to try to bridge divides. And the way we do this is that you can dialogue through gardening, for example. You bring groups of people, different cultural backgrounds, different sorts of age, generations, issues to do with, different kinds. Well, basically, bring people of difference together and get them to focus on particular kinds of projects. And one of the things that I find really appealing is community gardens. So you bring people together, you rebuild community, but at the same time, you get them to talk to one another, listen, and it's dialogue is not just about, as you know, I'm sure, it's not just about talking, but it is about listening actively and empathetically. And I think this is where, when we speak about dialogue, it tends to we tend to miss the points. Now, I'm a great I would say fan of ecofeminism, certainly. But I think the issue about what has become an issue about ecofeminism is that it has led to an essentialization of the concept of ecofeminists, to the extent that many feminists who have very rightly pointed out that the problem that we have in the world today is associated with patriarchy, and especially patriarchal capitalism, or patriarchal kind of forms of domination and control. So and it's I'm fully in support of those sorts of ideas. But what it has become as a movement is that many feminists have forgotten that when it comes to environmental issues, the most something that's of cardinal importance is to include others. So while I think there are a number of ecofeminists that are, for example, the philosopher Freya Matthews, who is a dear friend of mine, and we have talked about this ways of how we can use the principles and the philosophies of ecofeminism, but to ensure that we bring men on side. So this is the point that we have to try to all the kinds of the strategy that we have to try to work out of how we can extend. My personal view is that labels that we use may be great, so we can call someone an ecofeminist, we can call someone a deep ecologist, or we can call someone a shallow economist, or ecologist, or an environmentalist. These are all labels. At the end of the day, the labels are just going to divide groups and people and movements. And I think what we have to focus our attention is how we can work out ways and means and methods of collaboration. So if we share this important idea that we have to do something about making change happen in this world of ours, how we're going to construct and create new ways of living to try to foster the goodness in human society, then we have to look at all possibilities of creating a movement that building a movement or fostering a movement that bring everyone together. So there is always this danger that labels and identities may in fact divide, where we actually are attempting to try to bridge those divides. So that's my view, but I'm a big fan of ecofeminism as well.
Yeah,
Thank you,
you.
sir. That's really nice of you to say. Thank you.
Yeah, and a very exceptional presentation. In fact, before I hand it over to Vedabhyas for the vote of thanks, let me compliment you. And I could see that the attention was totally undivided amongst the audience. So this was truly exceptional. So thank you, Alberto, for all, and also for taking on questions. These are wonderful questions, and I'm sure that you would be equally impressed with the quality of the audience we have. So thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Vedabhyas.
Thank you, sir. May I now invite our research officer, Madam Geeta Shuklaji, to give the formal vote of thanks. Madam Geeta Shuklaji, please.
Thanks, Veda. Indeed, it was a great opportunity for the participants to listen, participants to this webinar, to listen to the views of eminent persons like Professor Alberto Gomes and Dr. Anup Surabji. Professor Alberto Gomes, you have rightly said that Earth does not belong. That Earth does not belong to man. In fact, man belongs to the Earth. And in this context, I am reminded of a Keynesian proverb that this earth does not, man does not, this earth has been loaned to the man by the future generation. And Dr. Anup Sarup, sir, you have been a part of this Gandhi Smith and Darshan Samiti family. But still, we should extend our thanks to the family member also. Thank you, sir, for your comments and for your observations. Thanks a lot, sir. And thanks to the participants also.
And to all the participants, let me say this much. Please stay safe and do take care. We are all worried about you. The Delta variant, we are all worried about it. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Please take care.
Thanks. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Anup Swarupji, and thank you, Professor Alberto Gomes, sir. It has been a wonderful listening to all of you, and we will remain in touch. It has been an exciting session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vedabhyas and Anup. Yeah. And Geeta, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Both of you, Professor Anup Sarup, as well as Dr. Roberto. Good work. We'll keep in touch, sir. Please.
Sure.
Certainly, we will certainly be in touch.
Sure. We have to do something, sir.